Peterson.
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan B. Peterson.
Jordan Peterson, everybody.
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson.
Welcome back, Mr. Peterson.
The Canadian psychology professor is somebody people love or love to hate.
So Patricia, I know that your interest in Jordan Peterson was well before the sort of controversy that happened sort of starting in 2016. Can you tell me why you were interested in him, and how long ago have you been interested in doing a film with him?
I first came across Jordan's work in 2003, back when I was a psychology undergrad student. I was taking a lot of philosophy classes. I was very much in the world of the big existential questions, trying to find my way, a lost early 20s something. And I came from a pretty religious Roman Catholic Italian family. I moved away from religion, and there was something about Jordan's book that I felt kind of went down to that religious level. And a lot of the talks that I later saw coming out on TVO and in Canada were about things like the necessity of virtue. It was engaging with these ethical and kind of religious questions. So it sort of filled in that gap for me. And I was also interested in the way that he talked about the idea of the divine individual, and that there's a divinity to paying attention to what you're interested in and where that takes you. And it's not just something frivolous. There's a real importance to, and kind of like a purpose that comes with you paying attention to and following. Like that was a really important guide for me, and actually something that guided me towards later pursuing this film. I felt like it was something really important for me to do, but I didn't understand why. And it was especially his introduction to Maps of Meaning, where he talked about having had nightmares during his teenage years about the end of the world. And he was trying to decipher the nature of evil, and not only this broad question, but it was something personal to him. So I was interested in the ideas, but I was also interested in the person behind the ideas. And so I finally reached out to him in 2015 about making a film. Interestingly, one of the ideas that led me to his book, Maps of Meaning, early on, was just from reading different philosophers. I sort of came to this conclusion that you can have two people in the same room, in the same place with the same coffee table in front of them, but your belief system and the way you frame the world informs reality to the extent where we can literally be in two different realities, even if we're beside each other. And this was like a big aha moment for me of, well, we're kind of screwed. Like, how can people really understand each other and resolve conflicts? And I remember that being the initial thing that somehow led me, I think, through a Google search to Maps of Meaning. So it's interesting how I, later found myself working on this film about Jordan's comments on Bill C-16, evolving into all of these other issues of political correctness, but with this idea of culture war looming underneath all of that. So it's been, I guess, an evolution of a lot of different ideas.
And given that your kind of interest was much more in the kind of mythological and his ideas, what did you think, or what did you feel at the time when all of the C-16 stuff started taking over? Was it a feeling of, oh, fantastic, I'm following a really alive story? Or was it kind of like, oh, this is not the direction I wanted this film to go in? Or was it both of those?
It's interesting because I guess the film kind of morphed a couple of times, because initially it was about the ideas, but then the film became about following Jordan and his friendship with Charles Joseph, and Jordan's renovations to his home, how he was adding a third story. Charles's family was adopting Jordan and giving him a name in Kwakwala, Charles's indigenous language. So I had already decided to shift from ideas to how the ideas manifest in his life. And I thought, well, that's a more interesting avenue to pursue for a film. So I was already kind of taking a human approach, but then the thing I didn't expect was I didn't start off with an intention of making a film about political issues as well. So I would say that came as a surprise. I don't think I ever felt like, oh, well, this isn't where I want the film to go, but it was uncomfortable for me, for sure. But the way I see the filmmaking process is, it's in a way, I mean, it's an honor and a privilege to be able, and hard work, to be making a film about something. And I think when you're really engaging in the artistic process, it's like you're becoming a vessel to showcase this thing. So it's like, it's not up to you. You have no idea where it's going to take you. You have to just kind of follow where it leads. And it's hard. It can be really uncomfortable. It certainly was for me, but I learned a lot along the way, and I always felt dedicated to pursuing it, regardless of where it took me.
What's the reception been like, and has it surprised you in any way?
It's been so interesting to release the film because we had a television cut, a 44-minute version of this film released a year ago in Canada only. And I think it's been a bit of a surprise for us to now release a longer version of the film and to run in more controversy, even though it's pretty similar to the first film that we released. To the one extent, we weren't surprised because we know how dividing Jordan's name can be in a room, and how he still is controversial among the art house and kind of left wing, which has become mainstream culture. But we were hoping to get more of a release in the art house and mainstream theaters. But then I guess the most surprising part was the theater cancellations that we got. So we had a week-long run canceled in Toronto. We had another screening canceled in Brooklyn, then another one canceled in Toronto. Another one that we were trying to set up in Houston that didn't happen because they were afraid of controversy. So the interesting thing about the cancellations is they were all because of staff complaints. So it wasn't the curators themselves, like they had already said yes, but then the staff complained, feeling like, well, most cases they hadn't seen the film, but they felt like it would be unsafe to have Peterson fans coming to the theater. But it's always been very important for us to have a theatrical release of the film because we want to be in the room with people when they see the film. It's such a conversation starter. We had a lot of test screenings in our living room where we had such interesting conversations with a diverse group of people watching the film. So we wanted to replicate that through a theatrical release.
The people that came to see the film, I mean, you know, people really respected the film. They enjoyed watching all the intimate stuff. You know, there's a lot of, you know, primary content there. And like, if you're a fan of Jordan, you see the film and you feel almost like an intimacy to the guy because you're there in his room. You're there, having breakfast with Tammy, you know, so people really get a kick out of that. But then when it came to the ideas and the kind of the politics, they were surprised, I think, about how balanced the film is, and that we never used, for example, a trans activist as a punchline. You know, it would have been very easy to do that. It would have probably been more lucrative to do that, because partisanship pays. That's what I've learned going on this tour. But at the same time, these Peterson fans that came out and chatted us up afterwards, they really respected that. They liked the fact that certain things were challenging in the film and how we showed the two different sides as best we could, but focusing on the human part. Like, who are these people? Why do they think the way they think? And it was a great example of a documentary documents reality. Reality is messy and hard to figure out. You can't do it overnight. So we liked that people got that, even though they didn't expect that, and maybe even expected something like a rah, SJWs are ruining everything, you know. We definitely show the overreach of the left, of course, because we talk about the free speech issue that happened at UFT here. But we quickly go into kind of who is this guy, and what is his life like? What has this been like for Jordan? So that people really appreciated. So that felt good. It felt really nice to get that after these cancellations, you know.
And in the film, there's this one scene where Jordan puts a mask on his face, and it sort of says, I think it's something about which one is the real Jordan.
So this is what I actually look like, and then this is what people who don't like me think I look like.
Which one is real?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I would say they're both real.
I think maybe Patricia, you ask him which one is true, and he says, well, they're both true. What do you think he meant by that?
Yeah, so that was such an impromptu moment of just setting up for an interview with him. And I always love that moment because I think it speaks volumes, and there's all these layers to it, right? So on the one hand, Jordan talks about the idea of the monster and how it's important to encounter your dark side. And he's very Jungian influenced, of course. And so on the one hand, I think he's saying, you know, I'm human, I'm this normal person, but I'm also a monster. And in order to be a good person, you also need to be a monster. You need to have a knife, but not necessarily use it, but know that you're not going to take advantage of me, kind of thing. So I think that's what he means there.
And how has your opinion of him been changed by making the film?
So I came across him as someone speaking about profound ideas that were really interesting and impactful for me. I was in my early 20s, and he was addressing the big existential questions and the kind of, I came from a very religious family, but went away from religion. And so there was something about his work that was going down to that level that would kind of fill in the gap of at least engaging in that religious space, I would say. So by the time I reached out to him to make a film about him in 2015, after having had this idea at the back of my mind for many years, for me, he was this kind of larger than life figure, which is very interesting because now he's this larger than life figure for most people. And for me, he's a human being, but I kind of had this like reverse experience of that. So it's been a kind of roller coaster ride, I would say. When he released the videos, the Professor Against Political Correctness videos, it came as a surprise to us. We didn't know the videos were coming. We didn't know how much he was thinking about this stuff. You know, we had some preliminary conversations with him about political correctness. But the Jordan Peterson that I knew before that, his views about that stuff was, or at least, you know, the way I knew of him as a professor and public speaker, those things were more hidden. So this was definitely a very new step for him to be coming out and speaking so publicly, and kind of advocating for specific things. So that was new. I would say it was very uncomfortable for me that the hill he chose to stick his pole in was about trans pronouns and human rights law. I understand why that raised a lot of red flags for people. I mean, you're criticizing a human rights law. It's like, whoa, what's going on with that guy? I understand that reaction. So it was an uncomfortable process, but it also forced me to dig deeper into a lot of issues that I didn't realize, and that I wasn't thinking about on a deep enough level, or that I didn't know how to articulate what was really going on about. So it forced a lot of that kind of thinking for me. And I guess I would say fundamentally, it just, witnessing Jordan go through this tumultuous period of his life just revealed how human he is to me. So I guess it's going from, for me, him being this larger than life figure to really this human being that's trying to adapt as this crazy phenomenon is emerging in his life. He's trying to stand up for something he believes in, and there's things that I agree with, things that I disagree with. But fundamentally just like seeing then how he would adapt to all of that, and also the toll that it's taken on him and his family and friends. So I think it's shown me the human vulnerability, and it's been this weird kind of like splintering off of seeing him as a person, but then witnessing him through media interviews and all these different stories people are telling about him is kind of a confusing experience as well.
And then to kind of talk about, back to your question about how have I seen a change in Jordan, man, I mean, with all of these interviews of people trying to corner him or to kind of criticize him unfairly on a mainstream platform, I can totally see how it could make somebody get really rigid and be like, okay, well, I'm not gonna give an inch. I'm not gonna make a concession. The war radicalizes you. It hardens up your skin. It says, well, fuck it. I'm gonna keep my cards close to my chest. I'm not gonna give you a concession because you're just gonna fuck me over later. That's kind of what happened, and it was a shame because polarization breeds polarization. And it's hard to blame the guy for that, because he's gone through so many of these interviews, and I've had just a little instances with these, well, unfortunately now, maybe.
But you do see that hardening.
I do see it, yeah. I do see that kind of like this overemphasis on this kind of like right-wing guy who doesn't give a shit about you. He just wants to use the situation to make liberals look stupid so they could win an election. This kind of buddy-buddy thing without really being skeptical of this guy. And then on the other hand, if a left-winger sneezes, it's a blog post, you know. So I kind of felt a little bit of that, seeing all the content that's out there.
And if you look at the opening of the film, it starts off with this scene of Jordan in 2015 with his family, and they're doing his personality test on himself. It was in its beta mode at that point. And Jordan is visibly different. It's before he changed his diet. I think his diet at that point was, fries and Diet Coke, like in between classes. There was like the fries truck outside. That's what I would see him eat. But in this scene, you just see a lightness to him, and the way his family teases him and they joke. That's a lightness that we haven't seen in Jordan in a long time.
Yeah. I've heard Jordan Peterson described as a kind of one-man lightning rod for the culture war, which seems pretty accurate over the last couple of years. What was it like for you guys being in the middle of that? Because I think you're, as you've said before, you're from a much more sort of artistic, probably left-leaning background. What was that like being in that kind of maelstrom? What did you learn from it?
So much. It was hard at first. The first year especially, things were so tense in Toronto. It was very difficult for me to get certain people to agree to be part of the film. Just immediately saying, it's a film about Jordan Peterson. Well, people's guard are up, and they're wondering, well, what are my intentions? And rightfully so, I understand. But especially when the opposition side is saying, well, don't give him a platform. It's like a film about it, even if my intentions are to make sense of it and try to understand it, which they were. And I wasn't necessarily sympathetic to everything he was saying. It didn't really matter if the idea is, well, don't give a platform to the discussion itself. So that made it really challenging. And being in certain documentary circles, it was nerve-wracking to say, well, I'm working on the Jordan Peterson film. But then that started to shift as he became more and more popular and gained more ground. And then suddenly all these filmmakers are flocking to him, and everybody wants a piece. And then it kind of shifted to, having to feel kind of like protective about what we were working on and had invested so much into. And, even learning about strange phone calls that took place of people trying to sabotage deals we were trying to get to fund the film, which was, it's so strange because it was also, this is my first feature film. It was all, I guess, very tumultuous, and things were happening very quickly. Every week there was a new drama taking place to try to delve into. And for a while, what I thought the film was about in the first year changed from what I thought it was about in the second year, and even the third year, it evolved. And I guess I let the story kind of guide me as it was evolving to then figure out, okay, what are we actually going to focus in here? And when it came to editing later, I realized I probably shot kind of 3 different films because, I learned how hyper-focused you have to really be for a film to be cohesive. But yes, it was confusing, but I'm so grateful for the many things that we learned about. Politically and culturally, my bubble burst when Trump was elected. I didn't see that coming. I didn't take him seriously. So I've learned so much about what was taking place underneath the surface leading to that. And it makes so much sense now. And I think it's helped my own views to become less superficial in a way where I would never question, things like, can empathy go too far? I would never question things like that before all of this took place.
For me, what shocked me, I didn't know that much about. Through this experience, man, for a good number of them, I just lost so much respect for progressives, or so-called. Because some of them, and because it's kind of like this reverse racism thing, where it's like the taller, the whiter, the straighter the person is, if they cough, it's a sign of bigotry. You know, it's like this weird thing where it's like kind of like the last page in Animal Farm, where it's like now the progressives won when in the heyday they were the the revolutionaries, the counterculture. We have to strive for civil rights, but they did and they won. It just surprised me how much they would turn on their own, seemingly their own principles, and also none of them would speak up against a more loudmouth version of of their tribe. When one person says something kind of crazy, nobody says anything because they're scared and they don't want to, and especially if they're white, they don't want to come off as racist. But they're going to lean in at the bar later on that night, lean in with their friends and talk about what they want to talk about. And then some of those people are going to end up being Trump supporters. Again, like Trump will probably win again. And it's like, okay, that's not good, because a conservative or just not a progressive should have more options than a guy like that. But unfortunately, they don't right now.
And you mentioned, Patricia, the filming with Charles Joseph, the Quackawak, is that right?
Quackawak.
Yeah, I'll let you say that. So that was one of the main features that you were initially following. Can you talk about that? What attracted you to that story, and what material do you have that you'd be hoping to put into a new film?
So I approached Jordan first in spring 2015, at the time with an interest in making a film about his ideas and his work. I think the initial film title was something like Between Chaos and Order. And then as I started to learn more about what was happening in his life, he told me that he was adding a third story to his home that was being modeled after an Indigenous longhouse. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. And I learned about his friendship with Charles Joseph, who's this carver who lives in the northern part of Vancouver Island. And they've known each other for about 15 years, just sort of met at an arts fair, about 15 years ago. And it's developed into this really interesting friendship where there's such different people. Charles is this raw artist. He's also a residential school survivor. So Canada has this dark history of having taken Native kids away from their families at a young age and put them into residential schools. And many, many of them were sexually abused, including Charles. So this happened to him at the age of 6, and he was in the school for 8 years. So he had this whole life of trauma that he was trying to move past, and he's still working on that, of course. And he never learned how to read because of his experience in school, and it's something that in recent years he's learned how to do, and he's now texting us and that sort of thing. Meanwhile, you have this formerly Harvard professor who's extremely articulate, who really admires the artistic capacity of Charles and how he just lives as this true artist. And so they complement each other in these interesting ways. They're so different, but they also place an interesting emphasis on the dream world. And the way that this film, which I intend on going back to make now, it was for a year and a half I was working on it until Jordan made the videos, and then the rest is history. But it's tentatively called Mechala, which is a Kwakwala word, that's Charles's language, and that means to dream. So I really want to explore the dream world. Charles has very vivid dreams. Tammy, as Jordan likes to say, Tammy dreams for the both of them, because Tammy's the one that has the vivid dreams, and then Jordan likes to analyze and interpret them. And I have this one scene where Jordan, Tammy, and Michaela are talking about a dream Tammy had of, there was this kind of shamanic character that was getting away, and the person in the dream, who Tammy thought was herself, but Jordan thought was him, so they had a bit of a disagreement there. That person was trying to catch that character, and it was very important. I think they were getting away on a horse or something like that. And I later asked Jordan, why do you think you had to catch him? And he said, because otherwise we would be losing our tradition, something to that effect. And so it was so interesting working on a film that was on that level to then have all this political stuff happen, because it resulted in things like the month of October in 2016. This was one of the most heated points in the controversy, where the articles were just starting to come out and journalists were questioning Jordan and trying to figure out, what is this guy really about? And at the same time, Charles and his chief and some family flew over to Toronto to bless this space in Jordan's home. And that's when a naming ceremony took place, where Jordan was given his sacred name in Kwakwala. And it was so strange to see those things happening at the same time. He's been given a name, and then he's been called other names in the media at the same time. Other footage that I have is a really special potlatch ceremony, and that's where Charles's family was officially adopting Jordan and his family into his. That took place in spring 2016, I think it was. So there's this big bonfire in the big house, and Jordan is kind of dancing around it, being blanketed. It was such a different film that we were working on before all of this changed. So I intend on going back and finishing that film once this tour is over, this film.
I would say one similarity between the films, though, is that they're both kind of human and honest. Like, there's this one choice scene, it's so good. Like, Patricia's in the back of the car, and Jordan and Charles are driving to a Truth and Reconciliation Commission meeting, which is an event for talking about what happened in residential schools. And Jordan asked Charles, what's been the hardest thing? And Charles says, the smell of white people. So he would be taken to a room called Bible study, but there isn't a Bible in it. It's just this dark room, and he's being molested in there. So he closes his eyes as a little kid, and all the other senses are heightened, and he would never ever forget the smell of the priests. And it's really poignant, because Jordan is Charles's first white friend, right? And they're having this super candid moment, just very honest, very raw, talking about past trauma. And that I'm really excited about that film, because it's so human.
It's interesting that you bring up this idea of human, because that's also been an interesting shift of going from working on Mechala to the Rise of Jordan Peterson, because it's like there was this point in time where suddenly it was no longer ethical to make a human film. And that was really strange, because...
But you felt that, or...?
I felt... I didn't feel that, but I felt like the kind of outside pressures of, I guess, what's become kind of more normative documentary culture, or kind of left of center mainstream culture. It's like when I was getting feedback from certain people in early stages of the film who were very much in opposition to Jordan, they didn't like feeling any sense of appeal to Jordan's charisma at points in the film, or I think to even just taking a liking to his human side at any points. It was like there's a danger to humanizing him, because then it softens the point of view of, no, what he did is wrong, and there's a hard line here.
Did you think that was right?
I would say it was confusing and uncomfortable, but I didn't think it was right. I still made a human film, and in fact, I thought it was even more important to make a human film, because we were so aware of the culture war being the undercurrent throughout all of this. And the thing that's so easily lost is the humanity of all of these people. It's like, we need to see Jordan as a human, but we need to see his opposition as humans as well. And so that was fundamentally very important for us, to portray all of these people with dignity in the film, because you'll typically just see, a YouTube channel with a video coming from, let's say it's coming from the right, and it's, Jordan is the intelligent hero, and the SJWs are irrational, and SJW tears, or whatever it is. And that's all you see. And what we witnessed was just so much more complex than that.
And you mentioned before that you found it difficult to persuade some people to be in the film. That's been an issue, I think, for a lot of people making films about these kind of subjects. For example, I know with Evergreen, Brett Weinstein's experience with Evergreen, it was much harder to find people on the other side. Like Brett was obviously keen to tell his story, and but it's often, I know from my experience, it's often harder to find people who are willing to take the other side of that, because they see that kind of collaboration with a film about, say, Jordan Peterson would be tantamount to platforming him and all the rest of it. So how was that experience for you, trying to get people to go on the record?
Yeah, it was definitely difficult, but I kind of persevered through. And I think what helped in the end was trying to be genuine when asked questions about, well, what's my own background, what's my own interest, and what am I trying to get at with the story. And I think what also helped was that because I didn't chase that story, but it was more like the controversy came to me because of the position I was already in, I didn't have a strong position on either side. Well, he's right about this, or, I wasn't coming at it from a political perspective. I was coming at it from a human perspective. So it made my curiosity genuine, and it made my pursuit to make sense of what was going on genuine. And although I came into it with a big interest in Jordan's ideas, I also had a background of being more politically left of center. So it put me in this kind of perfect, conflicting situation where I could empathize with people from all sorts of perspectives coming at this. And I thought it was important to really ground myself in that, even though it made it a conflicting and confusing process. I thought that was important to give the film integrity and for people to see this genuine curiosity in me wanting to listen to them, as opposed to just peg them into a specific side to serve my own agenda in the film.
And has it affected and changed your sort of political views or cultural views? Where have you ended up at the end of this process?
Yeah, I love that. I love that question. Okay, so for me,
did you get red pilled?
Yeah, for a moment, I guess, but then I kind of grew out of that. For me, yeah, it was just like, look, challenge some of these left-wing things that we just take by default. So if you're living in the city, you come from an immigrant family, you turn on TV or YouTube or whatever it is, and you listen to the top people, things are generally left-leaning. I guess because they won the culture war, I don't know. And sometimes when you're doing other things, or you're not politically minded on your own, you can take certain points of view as default. Inclusivity, diversity, inclusion. Of course, that all sounds lovely and great. I'll sign that and wear your button, and hold up your banner or whatever it is at school. So this whole thing with Jordan and talking with him and with the people that I met through him, it challenged some of my lefty beliefs, the shaky ones, the superficial ones. They weren't even really my beliefs. They were just kind of rented from people that I liked, that are charismatic, that are on TV, that make Hollywood films or whatever it is. And it just kind of gets compounded over the years. And so you take them and you kind of forget that they're not your own, because you keep saying it and saying it. And but this whole challenge of this kind of being at the border of the left and the right, I guess, from kind of traveling between two tribes, has shaken out the more superficial ones, or the ones that were never really my ideas, so that's been good. I feel more confused though, but something closer to, I want the things that I say to be the things that I do, and less about making other people happy online, or virtue signaling, or putting something out there to get a response. So that's been a really good evolution for me, and I'm really happy it happened at the time it did.
Patricia, where have you ended up?
I'm not even sure. Maybe I would have to do one of those political questionnaires. I don't think that I've fundamentally shifted too much where I am on the spectrum, because I don't think my values have changed, or my personality, of course, hasn't changed. But I think I've just become more open-minded to understanding where where conservatism comes from, really, and being more open-minded to listening to that and seeing value in it. And I mean, I probably have moved more to the center maybe than I was before, because I think had become more superficially moved towards the left and unquestioning. But I think it's kind of brought me back to a place of where I used to be, but was just kind of maybe going along with where culture was going without really paying attention to it. Like one of the things that going through the process of making this film has made me think about was back when I was in university. I was part of a student club that made this magazine called Perspectives. And the goal of it was to put out a controversial question and ask students, faculty, and staff, what do you think about this and why? So it wasn't a poll. It wasn't like, yes or no, what's your vote? It's like, what do you think? And think deeply about why, and write it all out so you can think about it and so others can learn about why you think what you do. And then we also looked at whatever the question was. We looked at it from different perspectives, so different kind of framing. So our first issue was about what do you think about same-sex marriage and why? Because at the time, this was a big topic in Canada. And it's so strange to even think about that now, because I feel like I'm like aging myself. Like that feels like something that would be centuries ago. And in a way, it's embarrassing to even ask, like, wow, we were thinking about what do you think about same-sex marriage? It's just so interesting how culture shifts over time. And when I think about it now, I don't know how a magazine like that would do on a campus. I mean, I know there are clubs forming. A lot of them are actually influenced by Jordan Peterson, as we've seen on this tour, that are about thinking critically. And we met this great one in New York that was inspired by the idea of steel manning, which was used during the Jordan Peterson-Sam Harris debates, right? Like, let's start this off by steel manning your opponent. What a beautiful concept. It really enables you to understand, think through, empathize with where that other side is coming from, and helps you to think more clearly. So in many ways, I think working on this film has brought me back to that place that I used to be in, and kind of like reintegrate parts of myself that were lost.
And you mentioned sort of the impression that you've had touring the film as well. How would you summarize the impact that you think Jordan Peterson has had over the last 2 years from what you've seen making the film and then going and visiting all the places that were influenced by his thought?
So I guess there's the political impact, and then there's the personal impact. There's some people that aren't even really interested in the political stuff at all, aren't interested in hearing about Bill C-16, political correctness. They just love his book, 12 Rules for Life. And they're really coming at it from the perspective that I guess I was initially coming at it when I knew of his work in Maps of Meaning. So we found a lot of those people, I would say, who are just kind of really interested in those ideas. And Jordan has, those people are just so enthusiastic and kind of willing to do anything to help, just because it's like pulled them out of this stuck state that they were in their lives. And those reactions don't surprise me, even seeing the level to which those reactions have skyrocketed throughout this period, because I saw those things happening before he became a famous and public intellectual, but they were happening at a much smaller scale. But in his classes, when I would go to them, in 2014 or 2015, students would all line up after class and crowd around him and just want their 5 minutes to ask him a question. So there was always this depth to the kinds of things he was talking about that would go to that level, that would help people kind of just have moments of insights and put ideas together and come out of apathy and confusion. It's almost like he's doing for people with words and philosophy what music and art can do. So there's that side of things, but then there's, of course, the people that are really inspired by him speaking out politically. I had one comment, I think, from a student in Texas who said, well, there are a lot of films about the liberal heroes or the people on the liberal side, and so thanks for making one about a conservative. Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I remember that.
Comment.
For me, I think about Fight Club. So when Fight Club came out, I was in grade 9, and I remember this one line from that: "We're a generation of men raised by our mothers." So and I kind of knew this before, but when I met them on tour, I was like, yes, like there's a lot of guys here that either didn't have dads, or maybe their dad was a bit too kind of masculine and too hard on them, and they didn't know how to talk to their own dad, or maybe a little bit too feminine, a little bit too soft, a little bit kind of laissez-faire about things. Then you got Jordan on YouTube, right where these boys are already at, and talking about things in a, offering structure, offering kind of helps, hints and everything that help them to kind of guide their life. So that was really nice to finally meet them. But yeah, like unless there's some of these guys, they kind of see Jordan as their dad, like it's like, and they get very sensitive online. But yeah, when I met them, I was like, they really look up to this guy, and Jordan has really helped them. Like because Jordan writes in a way that's accessible, and that isn't too heady. Like Maps of Meaning is a hard read, but 12 Rules for Life is accessible to a lot of guys. And so I think that's good. It was really cool to finally meet the people that have been influenced so positively by Jordan's life and by Jordan's work.
That makes me think of another comment we got. I think it was also in Texas. So in the poster of the film, we kind of show all the different pieces, all the media, all the people, the social media, all contributing to the kind of co-creation of Jordan, the persona of Jordan. Jordan as this mythological figure. And in the film, we also kind of have these like chapters headed by different stories being told about Jordan for the same reason, because of this kind of splintering that we experienced throughout the making of this film, and kind of like there's Jordan the human, and then there's all of this. So one of the figures that we have in the film, on the film poster, because there's the kind of left side and the right side. One of the figures on the right side is a person who's holding a mask of Jordan. And so it's kind of like the person who really admires Jordan and then tries to be like him, tries to speak like him, starts to use his words, but it gets to a point where he's like, he's not really in touch with himself and what he even thinks, but he's imitating Jordan. And there was someone that came up to me after, and he said, "I love seeing that on the poster because that used to be me." And he eventually started to become self-aware of it and grew out of it, but it was kind of a phase he had to go through in the growth process of this. So it was really cool having someone, comment and relate to that, but then also have that awareness and growth, and be able to have the vulnerability to admit and say, well, yeah, I used to be him. And it's not like, we're above what's on the poster. I think it's like there's a little bit of everybody in there, and everybody has, love or hate Jordan has kind of contributed to him exploding into this larger than life figure.
Rebel Wisdom is a new sense-making platform, bringing together the most rebellious and inspiring thinkers from around the world. If you're enjoying our content, then you can help us make more by becoming a subscriber, which will give you access to a load of exclusive films. Also, you can then join our group Zoom calls to discuss the ideas in the films, and you can send us ideas for questions for upcoming interviews. We're also looking for talented people to help us out with editing, graphics, music, that kind of thing. And if you're a regular viewer, you'll know we talk a lot about the value of embodying or actually living out the ideas that we talk about. So that's why we run regular events in London. Check out the links on the website for more. And hope to see you soon.